Did we make a mistake in choosing this format? So today we're going to talk about these shelves, some of the considerations that we took into when we decided to build these, some of the issues that we saw that could potentially happen, how we tried to mitigate some of those things, how we will mitigate other ones in the future when they come up. But hopefully this is informative about how we're building shelves and why. Hello everybody, this is Danny from Homestead DNA. Amy's using the sink. When you're down in the cellar, you hear all the noises. I wanted to talk about these shelves because we got a few comments, and rightfully so. At the time that we built them, or literally when we posted the video, we had already built them. But when we posted the video, we saw that day a video from 1870s Homestead saying how these weren't going to work. They basically had some sagging going on in their core chars, and so these over time were starting to sag. Now, the truth is, we knew this. We didn't create a video of us creating these shelves, in which I would have talked about it, but honestly, I just had to get it done. I didn't have time to make a video about it, which happens a lot. But I did want to talk about it because it's, understanding kind of how these structures go together. You got a 2x4, all right? Standard 2x4. How a 2x4 is laid out determines how strong it is. A board like this, laid out flat, like so, this is the weakest way a 2x4 can be. You can bend it a lot easier. A board that is laid out like this is pretty strong, but over a span actually becomes weaker. You can actually bend it that way. A vertical 2x4 like this can withstand a ton of pressure down it, because essentially it is using the weight of all of this wood, or at least all the wood between and the grain fibers, and the way it grows against gravity. And so this is the strongest way you can actually put a 2x4. It's not always the most useful way, but it is the strongest. So when we use studs like this to put in walls, there's a reason why. And the reason why we're doing it is to transfer weight down the stud into the floor. If I can get my camera to do it. So everything you're doing in really any construction or any building like this is making sure that the weight that you have on the shelves, that's a bad example because there's not a lot of weight there, the weight you have on these shelves is transferred to the ground. And so yeah, you have to think about everything is, I've got weight here. Now that weight's going to go into this piece of plywood, which is going to help distribute it out a little bit more evenly. It's not going straight down, it's going into this, and then these are all kind of evenly distributed between each other as a mass. And then that mass evenly distributes it between the wood that's beneath it. So there's, some center frames here, that are taking some of that load, and then they're actually taking it over here. And really, all of the weight of these shelves is being kind of pushed down, but then transferred over here into this stud. That goes all the way down to the ground. And so all the weight is being put there. Now, there are 4 of these, so they are distributed. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4 over there. So all 4 of those kind of more or less equally take the distribution of all of the weight of this shelf and this shelf and this shelf down there. And that's how it gets to the ground. So that's essentially what you're doing. Now the problem that we have is not really that. It's more of, well, there's weight that's here as it gets distributed that puts pressure on the middle, and that can make this bow down over time, and probably will make it bow down over time, especially with a ton of weight. Now, bowing is probably not going to make it fall. I would worry less about it falling than bowing. Bowing is just not nice, and you may have some that kind of slide towards the middle, and you don't want it. You want it to be as straight as you can be. The bigger concern of falling would be right here. And this is where the screws go in, or they go in from this side if you've done it that way. We did ours with pocket holes. So the screws go in like this. With ours, is them shearing off or snapping in some way. Then it will fall. And, a corner will fall. All these will fall off. But bending is actually unlikely because it's not going to bend forward like this. Or very unlikely to bend forward, I guess I should say. I guess you could have the front bend and not the back, and then stuff could slide forward. You would see that coming, though, over time. It's not going to happen overnight. Probably not. But, these are still very solid. I can move them a little bit, so there is some wiggle room there, but they're still pretty solid. The other thing, real quick, I'll add this one in also, is that this has a tendency to bow left or right, and it's obviously not going to squish down. I mean, it can, but it's like a few thousand pounds, I think, of force would it take to actually crush this 2x4. But if you have it sandwiched on both sides with something that keeps it from wobbling, it increases the pressure, the strength of this even more. So this is not a concern at all. It's only these sideways ones that are concerned. So a couple things you can do to fix that are you can turn it like this. And if you turn it like this, then your shelves are much stronger, exponentially stronger. The question becomes, how much stronger do they actually need to be? Now, how strong depends on the span, too. So the distance between here and here is how likely, the greater distance, the more likely, the less weight that can take on the center, and the more likely it is to sag. Another thing to consider that no one really considers unless you do woodworking is wood grain. Now, one of the things that's very, 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 very important, and this is it doesn't matter if you don't put anything on that shelf, it can sag, is wood grain. When you look at these 2x4s, one of the first things that we do over here is we stare down the length of the 2x4. I'm going to grab one and show you. All right, so here's a 2x4. I'm going to look down this edge of this 2x4, and if you look closely, if it'll focus down there, you can see that there's actually a dip on this side, which we call a crown on this side, and it's called a cup on that side. So there's a crown on this side. So this wood's natural tendency is to bend that way. So if you put this up like this, it's going to bend no matter what. Over time, it's going to dry out and it's going to bend. That's the natural tendency of the wood. But if you flip it around like so, and this isn't much of a crown, this is actually pretty good lumber. But if you were to flip it up like so and put this on top, then the wood's natural structure will actually help you maintain the weight all the way around. So that's one of the first things you should do when building something like this, is try to find out where your crown side is and make sure the crown side is up. The wood just naturally dries this way. And even this kiln drying stuff may still have a little bit of moisture, and over time it'll get moisture in it and then it'll dry again, especially in kind of damp places like this. So you really do need to pay attention to the grain and the crown of the board. But it's just how the board runs. The same thing with this side. This has a little bit of a crown on that side, I think. Also, it's got a little bit of a twist. Not much, but a little bit of one. And a little bit of a cup on this side. Very minor, but it's actually pretty decent lumber that we got. from Lowe's too, which is very, very rare to get decent lumber, decently straight lumber. So if I put that cup up, then over time this wood's going to naturally fall that way anyway. And again, if it gets moisture in it and then it dries and moisture and dries, over time it can sink even more. It's a very slow process usually, but it is a process, and it can happen just with humidity, relative humidity. So we tried to do that here. I don't know if we were perfect in it. In the end, I think we probably got a little more sloppy over on that end because we were just trying to get it done. But I definitely did mark all of them as to the tops and the bottoms for the crowns and such. So that will help, because it essentially will put the wood's grain pressure going up to help mitigate this thing falling down, and will help kind of push it over here. It almost makes it like an arch, even though it's straight. So that's something definitely to think about as well. But in the end, we have a 4-foot span here, a little bit less than 4 feet, 4-foot span here that has no support in the middle. So that's probably where we're going to run into problems. So what we're going to need to do is probably put a support right here. Now again, do all those other things first. So I'm not going to put a support on it today. Technically, we're not really having any problems. Those are straight as an arrow right now. But we probably will in the future, and we'll keep an eye on it. But there are a couple other things that you can do as well, and this might be a recommended thing as well, is, again, the big concern is these screws shearing off, or this wood breaking in some way, and then this shelf falls, and that would be disastrous. That would be no good, no bueno. So what you could do is just put a piece of wood here, between here. Now, if you do that, understand that you're transferring the load from here down that onto this next shelf, is really what's happening. If this shelf falls, you're definitely transferring it onto this next shelf. Now, if you screw that into this, you're actually transferring most of it into this board. Again, this is where it gets kind of, you just have to think about how the wood, the weight is being transferred down, because essentially it always wants to get to the ground. Think of it like electricity here. It's always trying to get to the ground. And so it's going to go over here. And the first way down, it's going to start taking that down, and it's going to take this down as well. But at the very bottom, you have to have something that actually supports it down there. Now, we already have a block of wood there, so we could just do a side post here if we were concerned about these breaking out, which at this point we're not. Honestly, we're not even super concerned at this point about warping and bending. And, I mean, they look pretty straight to me. All shelves kind of bend over time too. It's just if it becomes a real problem. Now, it could be that we never have a problem. It could be that our plywood's thick enough to distribute the weight a little bit more evenly, and so this kind of part in the middle here just doesn't get all the weight. It could be that we crowned our wood correctly and it doesn't actually need it. So I'm not going to necessarily solve a problem until I have it. But it is something we have to be concerned about and think about as we go through time. We were really worried about this. So if you are and you've built something like this, I would, do like the 1870s homestead did and put a little post in the middle. I would probably just put a full 2x4, and I would personally pocket hole it in so that it doesn't get knocked out. That would be my suggestion there, because a little dowel, I mean, honestly, in the end, is just as big as a 2x4 for getting in your way. It'll get in your way for sure, which is the reason why you don't want to do it to begin with. That's the reason why they didn't, is because you don't want something sitting in the middle. But it is what it is. And you have to do that all the way from the top shelf all the way down to the very bottom. And when I mean all the way to the bottom, I mean all the way to the floor. So one thing you have to be really careful about is making sure that there's a little gap down here that has to be filled to transfer all this weight to the floor. So if you do a middle dowel or something, you have to also put something under there, or otherwise all you're going to do is sag that shelf all the way down, because all of this weight's going to be distributed down to the middle of that shelf. So that one's definitely going to sag to the floor. And here we didn't use treated wood because we used some treated wood there. We don't want this touching the floor because then it's going to get moisture and it's going to rot out. So that's something to keep in mind as well. It needs to go all the way to the floor. And everything I'm saying in the front here also has to be done in the back, because obviously you have two sides to the shelf back there. The weight's distributed back there as well. So you have to take all this out and do the same thing in the back. And essentially what you're doing is adding another stud. It's just a bunch of pieces of stud that go straight down. I would also recommend adding something here. And here's the deal. It really doesn't even have to be a full thing. It just probably would look better. You could just put a block of wood right here and screw that into this. And then you've got a lot more weight you can put on this seam here without worrying about it falling. Because if you put a block here, really all you're adding is, because the block's still floating, the block's not what you're adding. What you're adding is screws. So let's say, again, we have 2 screws in here. Let's say their shear is 100 pounds, per screw, just as a number. I'm going to add 4 more screws here on a block. Now I'm at 400 extra pounds of shear strength. So that's what that actually does. So the number of screws you have is and correlates to the amount of weight before this will break. Another real quick thing is, since we have our screws going in this way, we do have a chance of this wood just snapping off on half of it, because essentially all that weight, the bottom half of this wood is not really taking the weight. It's only the top half of this wood. So something to keep in mind. You're not actually, you're really only using half of the wood. If it splits, which it's not likely to do, it would take a lot of pressure. But if it does split and break, then the screw will stay there and the shelf will fall. The rest of the shelf, you'll just have a little sliver of wood here. So again, something I don't perceive happening, but make sure you don't have really split ends or rotten ends or anything on these shelves here, because then that will happen. Make sure it's good solid wood. We also did things a little bit differently than them, which may or may not increase the chance of that happening. It actually might make it worse. We're not really sure. But so we toe hauled our screws in like this. So theoretically, most of the pressure is being pushed down into this wood. So we probably get a little bit more support than a screw that comes through here and then just meets in the wood like this. That's more likely to bend than one that's done like this, possibly. I don't know. Let us know in the comments what you think about that. That's just my thought process. So overall, we still love these shelves. We definitely aren't changing our methodology. We think it's great to build. It's just that there may be a couple of improvements that you will need to make over time, depending on how much food you actually store on there. We're ready for garden season though, so obviously most of this stuff will end up being moved. This is all just storage because we had shelves. If you have shelves, put stuff on. Don't waste the storage. But when garden time comes, we're going to fill up all these jars and we're going to put them on here, and we'll see if that changes anything. Right now we've got our pickle jars. A lot of them are pint so they're not as heavy as full-fledged quarts. So we're probably not experiencing any issues because of that. And then our green bean shelf isn't full either. So there's a lot of things that, and these are dry packed potatoes, so they really don't weigh much at all. So we're probably not experiencing the problem because we're not fully stocked yet. But we will be, and we will watch that as we do it and make the changes as necessary. So I hope that explains this. I think it went into probably more detail than I needed to on, overall the considerations for, constructing something like this with the design the way that it is. But again, we like it, and we're going to keep it. So again, this is Danny from Homestead DNA, and I really appreciate you guys stopping by and visiting us. And this video is actually going to come after our next video, because Amy said in our last video that our next video was going to be our garden planting video. So you're going to see that one, and then you're going to see this one. That's all I have today. I appreciate you guys, and y'all take it easy and like and subscribe if you like this kind of stuff. And we appreciate you guys stopping by. Thanks. Bye.